Okay, so this is a Kyosho Mini-Z 4x4. I figured I'd make a video about this because I haven't been doing nothing lately. I know I haven't uploaded content recently. I've just been really quite busy with other things and kind of taking a little bit of a break from doing projects because I do have some projects to do. Like I still have to work on more A&L cars to restore, and I have a B2 over there that I'm working on, but I just haven't really had the motivation to come down here honestly and do that stuff because I've been getting into some new things like this Mini-Z 4x4, which is really cool. So why did I get this? I bought this partly because I'm curious about these mini crawlers. I think especially the Kyosho ones look really cool because they have a nice scale look to them, but also it's related to how I want to try to get my kids involved in RC. I'm getting my son into RC a little bit over the last, say, 6 months or so, starting with a Losi Mini B, and he likes that. He likes playing with it, and I wanted to give him a chance to like drive it around more in a sort of more organized way. So I built a racetrack in that room over there with foam mats and like yellow piping. But that track is really more of an appropriate size for like a Mini-Z, a Kyosho Mini-Z, like the Mini-Z buggies. The Mini B will run around there, but it's a little too big. So I bought him a Mini-Z buggy too, and I bought myself one as well because I want to be able to play with him. But my daughter, who's younger, sees that and she wants to play. And I let her use my transmitter for my car. But she's not as good at controlling them because she's only like 3 years old. So she's just going to like jab the throttle at full throttle and send the car flying into the wall. So I figured if I get something a little slower, like a mini crawler, because they crawl, by design, these things crawl, they go slowly, then that would be, even at top speed, would be slow enough for my daughter to be able to understand how to handle an RC car. And it would also be something that's kind of interesting and different and fun for my son to play with, to crawl over things, like to build Lego obstacles and book obstacles and things like that for him to play with. So that could be a good way to introduce both of them to some version of RC where they can learn how to control a vehicle together. So that's why I got them. And I got them both a Mini-Z 4x4, and they do very much like playing with them. And for them, I installed the light kit. So Kyosho makes a light kit for front and rear headlights, and they like to like shut all the lights off in the house and drive around in the dark, and they get a real kick out of that. So that's cool. So for mine, I bought mine first just to see if it would be worth getting them one. And as usually happens, I ended up modifying it, so I want to walk you through what kinds of modifications I made and kind of what works and what doesn't, and some little tips on some of the mods that I put on here, and then we'll just go from there. So this is, as you can see, the Forerunner, one of the Forerunners. This particular one has the roof rack. This roof rack is a little fragile. Basically, this body and this roof rack, it's like what you would get in a 1/24th scale, static plastic model vehicle, which is to say that, some of the parts, especially the smaller parts like this, can't take much abuse. So if you're taking this crawling and this thing flips over, it's going to put a lot of stress on this roof rack. And I've already broken part of the roof rack on this side. These two pieces snapped off on the bottom. So as you can see, this moves around a bit. And then these two little vertical things here, I got 2 of those that I've lost completely. They're just gone. And that just comes from, some moderate abuse. This happened when one of my kids was using it, I think my daughter, and she may have dropped it, and these things just popped off. So, okay, I tried to glue them back together, but they don't quite hold well. So if you're going to get the one with the roof rack, I would suggest putting something on top to help cushion it. So what I did here to just try to preserve the rest of it is to take one of the stock wheels and tires and drill a little hole through the body and just mount this on top. So even though it puts a little bit of weight on the roof, in case the truck rolls over, at least you're kind of, this tire is taking up any weight that would, you know, go onto the roof of the truck, and it won't transfer so much to this bar here and end up breaking more of the roof rack. Just a little thing there. And by the way, any weight that you add up here with this lightweight plastic wheel is more than made up for by all the brass stuff you're going to put on the bottom anyway. So that's step one. What other things did I do? Well, as you can see, I did upgrade the wheels. So we'll start with this, the wheels and tires. By the way, for all the upgrades, I'm going to try to put links to the various items that I bought, so you know exactly what I bought. Because I don't remember the exact manufacturer names for these. Some of them don't even really have a manufacturer name. But anyway, I'll put the links there. So these particular wheels, I like the color. It's like a gunmetal color, and it matches nicely with this sort of sand-colored body. And it comes with tires with foam inserts. These tires are nice and grippy, and the wheels are aluminum instead of plastic, so they're a little heavier. So between the grippy tires and the heavier wheels, you're going to get more grip when you're crawling over obstacles. But these wheels are meant for the SCX24 and other 124 scale crawlers that have hex wheels. The Kyosho Mini-Z doesn't have hex wheels. It has some other kind of wheel mount. It's kind of sort of this weird looking thing. But nonetheless, you can get hex adapters like this that mount onto the Kyosho wheel mount, and then this hex part mounts onto the wheel. These particular ones are 3D printed, and they work. Technically they work, and I initially used those. But because they're 3D printed, they can break. So instead what I ended up using are, you can see here, this little brass piece on the inside of the wheel. It looks like a disc. It's actually shaped to look like a disc, a brake disc. And it actually has even like the little slots in it and everything to make it look more scale. So it's a brass wheel adapter to adapt the Kyosho style axle output to hex rims. There are other kinds of brass wheel adapters instead of ones that look like the like disc brakes. There are ones that look a bit more like, you know, these hexes here, but they're just made of brass. You can get those too. I just happened to upon these ones, and I think they look pretty cool, so I got them. So that allows me to mount these SCX24 style wheels. Now the wheels are, I believe, the same size, but the tires are larger. So if I just put this side by side here, you can see the outer diameter of the tire is bigger on these upgraded wheels. The tire is also a little bit wider too. So what happens is, if you just mount these without doing anything to lift the body, these will rub against the body at full lock and as the suspension is moving around. So you have to lift the body. There are different kinds of lift kits you can get. One is suspension blocks. So these little 3D printed blocks you can add between the bottom of the shock mount and the axle casing here that will offset the shock. So basically the way the shock mounts is you have this axle casing on both the front and rear. And it's an upper and lower half. And as you screw that shut, that screw goes all the way through and it mounts onto the bottom of the shock. So it's like this screw holds multiple things together. What I mean by this screw, I mean these two screws here, 1, 2, and then 3, 4. They go through the axle casing and then into the shock mount. Okay, so I forget how many millimeters, maybe 3 or 4 millimeters or so. That's going to help you lift the body a little bit. And then there's a separate body lift kit that basically mounts an extension onto the posts that are connected to the body to push the body up. So those two combined will give you enough height of the body so that you avoid any rubbing of the tire against the body. This 3D printed body lift kit also comes with a bumper lift to account for the fact that the body is raised. And they also give you some stuff to I think, to change this rear tire mount into like a tow hitch. I left that out. I like the way the rear tire looks, so I just kept that there. So, okay, lifted body, fine. The next thing I did was to add aluminum oil-filled shocks. These are Kyosho units. The stock units that come with the kit are just plastic, basically oilless shocks. So all you get is springs, there's no damping, and these are not sealed, so if you put oil in them, the oil will leak out. These are sealed, so you could, and it comes with oil, so you just put the oil in and it makes them nice and damped, so when you drop it, it doesn't bounce everywhere. That does make it a little better going over obstacles. What else did I do? Everything else, other than the visual stuff, which I'll get to later, everything else is centered around either protecting the underside or putting weight down low. So in addition to the brass wheel adapters, I also have these brass axle covers on the rear that just adds weight to the bottom of the chassis, as well as brass steering knuckles to the front, which is kind of, it adds a comparable amount of weight to the front as these axle covers add to the rear. And there are two kinds of knuckles you can get. So the ones that are on there are basically like a brass version of the stock knuckle. So the stock knuckle has these little ears or whatever, these little posts that come out of the top and bottom, and they mount inside of the wheel axle housing. So again, this wheel axle housing is a top piece and a bottom casing, and there's a piece at the end here. Let me see if I can find the right lighting. Right here. This is good. So there's a piece that comes down like this and up like this, and it wraps around those two little pins for the steering knuckle. Okay, and I found that to work better than this style. So this style here, these little ears here, instead of they wrap around the outside of these guys. So they wrap around here like this rather than going on the inside here. And I found that these have a little bit more bind, so you'll find yourself having better steering if you use the types of knuckles that I have here. Even though these do add a little, I think they add a little bit more mass than the ones that are on here. These add maybe 8 grams. These are possibly a bit more, 10 or 12 grams. So that's one thing. The other thing is when you do mount them, it's all about using these two screws here to clamp down on everything. You don't want to clamp this down too tight, because even though these screws go through the axle housing and then mount into the bottom of the shock mount, if you tighten this down too much, you're going to create bind, because this part here and the other part are going to squeeze too much together, and the servo won't be able to steer the wheel. So you got to get it just right, and that's made even more challenging by the fact that I have these racing skid plates here, and the way the skid plates are, I don't know if you can see, but the screw mounting hole is more like a slot, and so there's a little bit of extra material on the outside on both sides that kind of rubs up against part of the axle housing. So if you tighten this down too much, it's actually going to press against the axle housing, and it's going to make things bind up even more. So you got to be a little careful when you mount these skid plates onto the bottom of the axles. And as you do so, by the way, because this material here for the skid plate has some thickness, and the shock offset, those little 3D printed shock offsets also have thickness, you won't be able to get away with using the stock screws, because for each of those things, it's pulling the screw out a little bit, and you won't have enough to actually hold the shock mount down. So you want to replace those screws with 2 by 12 millimeter screws. You're going to need 8 of them, so 2, 4, 6, 8, front and rear. And that holds everything just fine. Those are the only screws that I've really had to replace with longer screws. Everything else is stock screws, except for the screws that mount the wheels, because there's an offset there, and the actual wheel adapters come with longer screws to account for that. Okay, what else did I do? I didn't do anything with getting like aluminum tie rods here. I just kept those all stock steel. You can get heavy duty universal joints on the front, because this is a solid axle, and then there's a universal that comes from the axle out to the wheel. You can get a heavy duty steel unit, which I didn't do. I just kept the stock plastic units. You can also get brass versions of that to add even more weight to the bottom of the chassis, which is kind of cool. But again, I didn't do that. The stock unit is working just fine for me now. I did put in an aluminum cross brace here. Initially, I thought it was because maybe the plastic unit could flex as you have all of this weight down here, and as you're trying to push one, steer the wheels one way or another, maybe the plastic unit can flex, but I don't think that's the case. And I did find that when I had these knuckles mounted, that I was getting some toe in, so that this wheel would point in a bit and this would point in a bit, and that's what got me to get this aluminum brace here. But I found it didn't make a difference in the toe, and that was because really this particular knuckle wasn't made perfectly well, and so the mounting point for this steering link here to either side of to either knuckle, that's this mounting point right here, wasn't put in the exact right location, and that caused the wheels to be slightly misaligned. So that's another reason why I took these off. Now if you are going to get this steering link here, just be mindful of the fact that because it's anodized aluminum, you're going to have you got to put some time into threading the ball stud into the hole where it goes. It's not going to screw right in. Now I found this to be the case for both the Yeah Racing steering brace, which is right here, and this one, which is made by Nex. Same exact problem. I think because there's some finish on the outside, either it's paint or anodization, and that adds coating over the threads that are in the hole here. So you can't just screw the ball stud in. You got to screw it in, screw it out, screw it in, screw it out, and keep going in and out and in and out until you work your way through all the threads to get that ball stud all the way in. If you just crank it down, it'll break. That's what happened to me when I first tried to do this. So don't do that. Let's see, what else did I do? So in terms of modifications, that's mostly it in terms of mechanical stuff. The other thing was with the steering servo saver. The servo saver there is a bit like what you would have in like a Tamiya kit, where it's sort of three pieces. There's a piece that mounts onto the servo. There's the servo horn, and then there's like this little clip that mounts in between the two, and the clip flexes, and that's your servo saver. Now that works perfectly fine if you're running the stock wheels and tires and no extra weights at the bottom. But what happens is as you add weight, then that weight is going to act against the servo saver, and the servo is going to move, and the wheels aren't going to move with it, because all that extra the difference in force between what the servo applies and what it takes to move the wheels is being absorbed by the servo saver. So the wheels might just move like this when really you want them to move like this. So what you have to do is just take the screw off here, take the horn off, and just put super glue on the inside, and then reattach everything just to lock the servo saver. That will make a big difference in how much wheel movement you get as you add more weight here. One of the fundamental problem of the Mini-Z 4x4, the only problem it really has is that steering servo is pretty weak, and it's not easy to upgrade because that servo is a 5-wire servo, and if you buy an upgraded micro servo, it's going to be a 3-wire servo. Well, what's the difference? With a 3-wire servo, all the control electronics are inside the servo housing. With a 5-wire servo, all the control electronics are in the combined receiver and speed control that sits in the back here somewhere. So what happens is when people upgrade these Mini-Z 4x4s to have a more powerful servo, what they end up having to do is to replace all the electronics. I don't want to have to do that. That seems to be, really overkill just to get better steering. So I tried to play games with the existing servo to get it to work better. One of them is locking the servo saver. The other one is adjusting the length of this rod here, this tie rod. One thing you have to remember is especially as you add these little spacers here to the bottom of the shock mounts, that's going to lift the chassis up relative to the axle. And so what that's going to do is to change the angle of this rod at your sort of stock ride height. Okay? And that means the distance there between this ball stud and this ball stud will grow as this chassis gets pushed up. So you have to make that rod a little bit longer. So just pop it off, lengthen a little bit, pop it back on. You got to play with it because it's not a turnbuckle, it's a tie rod. So you got to keep popping it on and off to adjust the length to get it just right. And what you'll find is you can get more throw in one direction or the other depending on how long or short you make this rod. So if you make the rod shorter, it's going to turn to the left more. If you make the rod longer, it'll turn to the right more. Why is that? Well, if you can't get enough left steering, the servo horn's only going to move this far. It's not going to move any farther than that. So at this position, you want to pull as much as possible this way along this steering link. That means making this rod shorter. And vice versa if you're going this way. The servo's only going to go this far in this direction. It doesn't go any farther than that. So if you want to move more this way, you're going to make the rod longer to push this steering link out. So you have to find the right length that will give you the right balance between left and right throw. And this matters because it's a weak servo, and so you have all this weight that you're adding to the bottom of the chassis and all the extra traction of these better tires that's going to add more resistance to turning the wheels left and right. So you got to play little games like this to try to get as much as possible out of this relatively weak servo. So those are two things I did. The third thing I did was to use different types of batteries. So I'm not going to upgrade this to like a LiPo pack. It takes 4 AAA cells, and initially I was using nickel metal hydride cells. And if you're running the stock setup, no modifications whatsoever, those work perfectly fine. There's no problem. But nickel metal hydrides have 1.2 volts per cell. So with 4 cells, you get 4.8 volts. If the servo isn't strong enough to move the wheels left and right with all these upgrades, one thing you can do is just increase the voltage. How do you do that? Instead of using a nickel metal hydride AAA cell, you can use a lithium ion AAA cell. So then you go from 1.2 volts per cell to 1.5 volts per cell, just like an alkaline battery. The thing with alkaline is that as the cells discharge, the voltage drops. With a lithium ion cell, it maintains that voltage until the cell dies. So you get more consistent voltage output. So then you go from 4.8 volts to 6 volts total. That'll give you a little bit more power on this servo, give you a little more throw. If you want to go further than that, which I did not do, you can get a lithium polymer AAA cell. They do make those, and those get you 3.7 volts per cell. Now you have 4 cells that you put in here. So with just 2 of those AAA lithium polymer cells, you go from 6 volts up to 7.4 volts, give even more power on the servo. But then you have to short 2 of the terminals in the battery holder so that you're not overdriving the voltage on your electronics. But the advantage of that is in only using 2 cells, so the way the cells mount is you have 2 on the bottom like this and then 2 on top like this. So you could put 2 in the bottom and then just run a wire along the 2 top ones to short those. You'll keep the weight down low. So if you're really interested in actual crawler performance, that's probably the best way to go. The only problem is as you step up the voltage there, as you go from a nickel metal hydride to a lithium ion to a lithium polymer within that same AAA volume, the capacity shrinks. So for these nickel metal hydride cells, I use Tenergy nickel metal hydride cells, and they can get up to, I think, 1100 milliamp hours per cell for the AAA cells. Those are very good. If you upgrade that to lithium ion, the best lithium ion AAAs get you around 733 milliamp hours, so still not bad. But then if you go from that to a lithium polymer AAA, you drop to 350 milliamp hours for the cell capacity. Maybe that's okay if you want to, for, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes or so. I don't know exactly how much runtime you get out of it, but it's a lot less capacity than, say, a nickel metal hydride cell. So just be aware of that. If you want to crank up the voltage using different chemistry, typically it comes with reduced capacity. And, again, maybe that's okay for you. So with the lithium ion cells, I run 4 lithium ion AAAs. I get, for 6 volts output, I get the servo is okay. I don't get full throw left and right, but I get enough to actually turn the truck. So that's good. Between that and adjusting the tie rod and locking the servo saver, it's enough. The only other thing to talk about here are the lights. So you can get a Kyosho light upgrade kit, which gives you front headlights, and those are bright white, and rear tail lights. There are other people out there that make, I would say, better light, well, I wouldn't say better light kits, different light kits. So the ones that I have here, let me see if I can turn this on. These have yellow lights, and it's not just the tail lights and the headlights. I also get light bar lights for the roof rack here, as well as fog lights. These are really cool, and they have a nice warm yellow glow. The Kyosho ones for the front headlights, they're white, and they're much brighter than these guys. So if you want something that's actually bright that you can drive in the dark with, the Kyosho ones are really the way to go. These are dimmer, but they look nicer. So to mount these is really simple, mostly simple. So within the body, you remove the hot glue that holds the dummy lights into these housings, and you just pop the dummy lights out, put the LED lights in, and you either use hot glue or some super glue to glue those in. You do that for the headlights and the tail lights. For the fog lights, there are no dummy lights in the bumper. It's just an opening, so you just put the LED fog lights in there and you glue them down, no problem. The roof rack lights are the trickiest, and I didn't get any instructions when I bought those lights, so I guess, you know, the builder, the guy who makes it, just assumes that you can figure it out. What you really have to do is to drill a hole in the roof of the body, and if you're running a roof rack, you want to drill a hole in such a way so that the roof rack hides the hole after everything is all mounted up, so that way you don't have this ugly looking hole, you know, making everything look ugly. So I don't know if you can see very clearly, but right around here, that's where the hole is. And it has to be a large enough diameter hole. I think I drilled a circular hole and then kind of routed it out to be kind of elliptical, so that way you can run all the lights through. And what happens is, drilling a hole for just one light isn't enough, because you run one light through and then the volume of the wire that connects that light to your battery is going to take up some of the space in that hole. So as you do the next light and the next light, you have more wires coming through that hole that are blocking the last light. So you got to make sure that hole's big enough to get all of that stuff through. And then when you do that, then you have to just be nice and tidy with how you route the wires, let's say through the underside of the roof rack, and then back around, and then through into these mounting points here. And again, these roof rack lights, they have dummy lights in them. You got to pull those out first, and then you put these in, you glue them in place, you're all set. So that was a bit of surgery. I was hoping I wouldn't have to drill any holes or do any, you know, damage to the body, but I did have to. But if you do it right, it'll actually look okay. It's not going to look like you really, you know, did a hack job on this thing. And yeah, so that's kind of it. Let's see. I'm really happy with this. I do like playing with this, and you know, between my using this and my 3-year-old daughter using hers, and my 6-year-old son using his, we have some fun with these. So it's a really good way of getting young kids involved in RC, in my opinion, because these are very slow. They don't go fast. And so it gives them plenty of time to react and plenty of time to learn how to actually control something. Then you can step up from there to something like, you know, a Mini-Z buggy, or a Low-C Mini-B, or a Mini GRX2, or something like that that's faster. These are really good for beginners. Now, one thing to note with these mini crawlers is that there are differences between manufacturers, clearly. A big reason why I chose the Kyosho one is not just the scale look and the fact that I'm a Kyosho fan, but also because of the way the drivetrain works. It's just a conventional gearbox. With the Axial SCX24, that is technically a better crawler. It is a more capable crawler, and it is more upgradable. But the problem, its strength is also a weakness when you're dealing with kids. What's good about it is that it uses worm gears, so that way, like if you're ascending or descending a hill, you just let off the throttle, and the worm gear itself locks the drivetrain, so you don't have to use the brakes. But the problem with that is if you have a little kid that's just pushing this thing along the floor like this, you're going to break those worm gears. So that's a big reason why I didn't get the SCX24 for my particular application. And also, it doesn't have quite as nice of a scale look. You know, it's meant more for performance. So that's pretty much it. I don't know if I'll make any running videos of this. I guess that would be kind of cool too, but I don't plan on doing it just yet. Anyway, if you plan on getting a Mini-Z 4x4, I highly recommend them. I think they're a lot of fun. They're only about 200 bucks, and you don't really need to upgrade them, but you can. They're kind of fun to do that with. And yeah, so that's it for now. Thanks for watching.